Ethan had been wandering the spaceport for hours, his mind swirling with thoughts of how his life had come to this point. The years of working low-level jobs on various space stations had drained him. He was tired, but what really bothered him was the crushing loneliness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Ethan had never been good at making friends, and here, on this busy spaceport, it seemed the loneliness only intensified. The bustling area was full of travelers from different planets, humans, of course, but also alien species with strange and beautiful features. Some were tall and slender, others were short and stocky. Some had skin in all shades of blue, green, and even purple. It was the kind of place that felt like an endless parade of people. And yet, amidst all the chaos, Ethan still felt alone. He passed by a row of bright neon-lit bars, each offering drinks from all corners of the galaxy. His stomach grumbled, reminding him he hadn't eaten much today. He was down to his last credits, and even those were barely enough for a cheap drink. Still, he needed to feel something other than his thoughts for a while. Ethan walked into a bar that looked quieter than the others, the door sliding shut behind him. The room was filled with the low hum of conversations and the occasional burst of laughter. There was a man sitting alone at the bar, a large mug of something green in front of him. His eyes were half closed and his speech was slurred as he spoke to the bartender. "Another round for my friend here," the man called out, his words barely making sense. The bartender, a tall being with several arms, just nodded and went about his work. Ethan took a seat at the bar, ordering a simple drink. He was trying to forget the long hours he had spent trying to find work or a purpose. His gaze drifted around the room, uninterested in the ongoing chatter. And that's when he noticed the man again, the one who was clearly drunk yet still making a ruckus. The man's laugh echoed through the bar, and Ethan couldn't help but look over. The drunkard seemed to notice him and swayed slightly in his seat, his eyes locking onto Ethan. "Hey you, I've got something for you," the man slurred, pointing at Ethan. His voice was loud and full of mischief. Ethan frowned, not sure what to make of it. "I think you've had enough, friend," he said, trying to ignore the man. But the drunk man wasn't having any of it. He pulled himself out of his chair with an unsteady motion and stumbled over to where Ethan sat. Nah, I'm not talking about drinks," he said, giggling to himself. "I've got 2 girls I'm looking to sell. Real beauties, these ones. You want them? 1 drink and they're yours." Ethan blinked, taken aback by the odd proposition. It was clear the man wasn't in his right mind. But there was something strange about the way he spoke, like it was more than just a drunken ramble. 2 girls?" Ethan asked, trying to make sense of what was happening. The man nodded eagerly, his eyes narrowing with excitement. Yeah, I bought them from some traders. They're worth way more than what I'm asking, but, well, I've had a bit too much to drink, so I'll take 1 drink. Just 1 drink and they're yours." Ethan was about to decline when something caught his attention. The man's words sounded absurd, but the idea of having something to occupy his mind for a while seemed appealing. And so, after a brief pause, he shook his head with a half laugh. "Fine. 1 drink, and you've got a deal." The man smiled wide, almost too wide, revealing several missing teeth. He grabbed Ethan's drink and shoved it into his hand. Here, cheers," the man said, raising his mug before downing the rest of his drink in one go. Ethan wasn't sure what he had just agreed to, but the man's laughter echoed in his ears as he took the drink and gulped it down. The alcohol was harsh, burning as it slid down his throat. He coughed slightly, looking at the drunk man as if to make sure this was all some joke. But there was no joke in the man's face. His eyes were serious, though glassy, and he staggered to the side, waving for someone. Moments later, 2 women entered the bar. They were stunning beyond any human standards. One was tall, with striking violet skin and silver hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. The other was shorter, with long, flowing hair that shimmered like golden strands of light. Their eyes were large, almost too big, glowing softly with a unique hue, one that shifted like the colors of a nebula. They were beautiful, ethereal, but there was something more about them, a presence that couldn't be ignored. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as they approached him. They didn't look like normal aliens. There was something regal about them, like they belonged to a different time, a different place. But here they were, standing right in front of him. The taller one, whose name he would soon learn was Lyra, gave him a curious look before speaking. You are the one who bought us?" she asked, her voice soft, yet filled with power. Ethan nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. "I guess so," he said, not sure what else to say. The shorter one, Zara, looked at him with a gaze that felt almost too piercing. She smiled, though it was a smile that seemed to hide a deeper mystery. "We are yours now, then." Before Ethan could respond, the drunk man began to laugh again, stumbling over to his chair. "See? Told ya? They're yours now? Take care of them? Yeah? 'Cause I certainly won't be." He slurred out the words, laughing as if everything about this situation was just a joke. Ethan wasn't sure what to do next. The two women stood before him, silent and composed, their expressions unreadable. He looked around at the bar, seeing the curious glances of others who had overheard the conversation. "Are you serious?" Ethan finally asked, his voice hesitant. Lyra nodded slowly, her violet skin shimmering under the bar's dim lights. "We are bound to you now," she said, as if there was no other explanation needed. "You bought us, and now we are at your service." Ethan wasn't sure if he was dreaming or if this was some strange twist of fate. The idea of owning two beautiful alien women seemed impossible, but here they were. The more he looked at them, the more he realized they weren't just some objects. There was power in their eyes and intelligence that far surpassed his own. These weren't just girls to be bought and sold, but before he could say anything else, the drunk man was gone, stumbling out of the bar and leaving Ethan alone with Lyra and Zara. The spaceport felt strangely empty now, the noise and chatter of the bar fading into the background. Ethan took a deep breath. "I didn't expect this to happen today," he muttered, trying to gather his thoughts. Zara, the shorter of the two, stepped closer, her golden hair glowing under the lights. "Neither did we," she said softly. "But here we are." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. What had he gotten himself into? Yet as he looked at Lyra and Zara, a strange curiosity bubbled inside him. This could be the beginning of something entirely unexpected. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. What had started as a strange one-off encounter in a spaceport bar quickly became something far more complex. Lyra and Zara, the two alien women he had bought for one drink, didn't just disappear after the transaction. They stayed with him. And in the days that followed, it became clear that their presence would change his life in ways he couldn't have predicted. At first, Ethan had thought it was all a joke, a misunderstanding that would be cleared up after a day or two. But Lyra and Zara were no ordinary women. Their behavior was calm, composed, and almost too perfect. They didn't argue about their situation, and they certainly didn't seem upset about being bought. Instead, they seemed to accept it as their fate, and over time, they began to show more of their personalities. Ethan didn't quite know what to make of it. The first night they stayed in his small quarters on the station, he had tried to keep his distance, unsure of how to act around them. They weren't just strangers, they were powerful beings from another world, and Ethan wasn't used to interacting with anyone like them. But the next morning, things felt different. Lyra and Zara weren't just there to pass time, they were helping. When Ethan stepped out of his room, Lyra was already making breakfast. Her graceful movements were almost hypnotic, and she seemed completely at ease in the small kitchen area. Zara, on the other hand, was sitting near the window, gazing out at the spaceport with a distant look in her eyes. "Good morning," Ethan said, trying to sound casual as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "I didn't expect you two to be up this early." Lyra smiled at him, her violet skin glowing softly in the early morning light. "We don't need much sleep," she said, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "And we thought you might like some breakfast." Ethan blinked, still trying to process everything. I don't know what to say," he muttered, his mind racing with confusion. "You don't need to do this. I'm not your owner." This was all just weird, okay? Zara turned from the window and gave him a soft smile. Her golden hair shimmered as she moved. "We know," she said, her voice gentle but filled with quiet strength. "But we owe you. You saved us from something we've been running from for a long time." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He had just bought them from a drunken alien, and now they were speaking like they owed him something. But there was sincerity in their words, something he hadn't expected. After breakfast, things seemed to settle into an unspoken routine. Lyra and Zara didn't need to be told what to do. They took care of small things around the station, tidying up, organizing Ethan's space, and even running errands for him. As days turned into weeks, and as Ethan's bond with Lyra and Zara deepened, the reality of their situation began to settle in. What they had told him about the prophecy, about being the key to something much larger than himself, was not just talk. The universe was vast, and there were people, or rather enemies, who wanted to control Lyra and Zara, and those enemies would stop at nothing to get them back. Ethan wasn't sure what he had expected when they first crossed paths. Maybe some time of peace. Maybe the three of them would figure things out and live quietly. But that wasn't meant to be. The more time passed, the more dangerous their situation became. Lyra and Zara had been quiet about the details of their past at first, but slowly, bit by bit, they revealed more about the enemies they were running from. There were powerful factions, ruthless mercenaries, and bounty hunters across the galaxy who had been hunting them for years. Ethan had heard of such people, cold-hearted mercenaries who chased down anything for a price. But what had started as a small threat quickly escalated into something bigger. One evening, as the three of them walked down a narrow corridor on the space station, Lyra stopped suddenly, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. "Something's wrong," she said, softly, her voice tense. Ethan froze, looking around. The spaceport had always been busy, full of travelers coming and going, but tonight the atmosphere felt different. The usual hum of activity was quieter, and there was an eerie stillness in the air. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his heart pounding. Zara's hand rested lightly on his arm. She too had become aware of the shift. "We're being watched," she said. "They've found us." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had known this day would come, but the realization still hit him, like a punch to the gut. Lyra's presence had always been enough to keep them safe before, but now it seemed like the walls were closing in. "Where?" Ethan whispered, his eyes darting around. The station had thousands of people, but none of them seemed suspicious. At least not at first. Lyra pointed toward a far corner of the corridor, where a group of tall armored figures stood. They were unlike any other travelers, their uniforms marked with the insignia of a notorious mercenary group. Ethan could feel the tension in the air thick and heavy. "We need to move," Lyra said, her voice low but commanding. "Get to the ship. Now." Before Ethan could respond, the mercenaries spotted them. The leader, a hulking alien with broad shoulders and a sharp reptilian face, turned toward them with a wicked smile. "There you are," he said, his voice booming with authority. "We've been looking for you." Ethan's heart raced. These weren't just any mercenaries. These were the kind of people who didn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who got in their way. Lyra and Zara immediately stepped into action. Lyra's movements were swift, her body language tense with readiness. Zara, on the other hand, seemed to calm the air around them as though preparing for something much bigger. Ethan didn't know how, but he could sense their power. These two women weren't ordinary. They were warriors capable of handling danger far beyond anything he had ever known. "Stay close to me," Lyra instructed, her voice sharp. "We'll get to the ship, but we need to keep moving." Without wasting another second, the three of them broke into a sprint running down the hall. The mercenaries, realizing they were being outpaced, charged after them, their footsteps heavy and urgent. Ethan's mind raced as they turned a corner and rushed toward the docking bay. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over at Lyra and Zara. They were both focused, their eyes scanning the environment for any threats. They were far more prepared for this than he was, but the sheer terror of being pursued made him feel helpless. Come on," Ethan muttered, almost to himself, as they reached the airlock. He could already hear the distant sounds of shouting and the pounding footsteps of the mercenaries. Lyra reached the controls first, swiftly typing in the access codes to unlock the airlock. As the door slid open, she motioned for Ethan and Zara to go inside. But just as Ethan stepped through, the airlock's door slammed shut, locking the three of them in. The sound of pounding fists against the outer door echoed through the ship. As Ethan stood frozen, he could feel the mercenaries closing in outside, their intentions clear. They wouldn't stop until they had captured Lyra and Zara. "Now what?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with panic. Zara's voice was calm, almost serene as she looked out of the viewports. "We fight. They've come too far to let us go now." Ethan watched as Lyra stood tall, her eyes focused on the controls. "We'll be safe in the air," she said, her hands moving quickly to initiate the ship's launch sequence. The hum of the engines filled the room as the ship slowly began to lift off. As they ascended, Ethan looked out the viewport at the spaceport below, growing smaller with every second. But his relief was short-lived. The mercenaries had followed them into the docking bay, and he could see their ships beginning to lift off in pursuit. "We have company," Lyra said quietly, her fingers moving across the controls. "We need to shake them off," Zara added, her eyes narrowing. "We won't lose them easily." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. They were in the middle of a chase, and it was clear that whoever was after them wasn't going to stop. The ship jerked forward as Lyra punched the thrusters into full speed. The ship rocketed into space, and Ethan's stomach lurched as the force of the acceleration pushed him back into his seat. He glanced over at Zara, who was sitting with her eyes closed, as if calmly awaiting what was to come. "Hold on," Lyra said. "This is going to get rough." Ethan gripped the armrests of his seat as the ship shot through space, weaving in and out of debris fields and asteroids. The mercenaries weren't far behind, and they were closing the gap with every passing second. Lyra's hands flew over the ship's controls, navigating them through the treacherous path ahead. Her eyes were steady, unwavering, and her focus never faltered. Ethan had never seen anyone move with such precision and skill. He could only imagine what it must be like to be a part of something so much bigger than himself, to be tied to a prophecy that could change the fate of the universe. "Zara," Lyra said suddenly, "prepare for the gravity well." Zara nodded, her golden hair glowing in the dim light. "Ready?" Ethan barely had time to react before the ship was pulled into a gravitational field. The ship lurched as Lyra steered it toward a small, uncharted moon nearby. The mercenaries, unable to follow, had no choice but to stop their pursuit for the moment. But Ethan knew this wasn't over. The mercenaries would be back, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. The tension in the cockpit was thick. Ethan's heart still pounded in his chest, but now there was a new weight on his shoulders. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He was part of something bigger, something dangerous, and it was clear that the mercenaries weren't the only threat out there. There were others too, others who would stop at nothing to control Lyra and Zara. As the ship landed on the moon's surface, Lyra turned to Ethan. "We're not safe here, but we have time to prepare." Ethan looked at the two women, his mind racing. He had been thrust into a dangerous world he didn't understand, but he could no longer deny the truth. He had a role to play, and whether he was ready or not, the fate of the galaxy might depend on him. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice more determined than before. "We'll make it through this." Lyra and Zara nodded, their expressions serious but not without hope. And so, they took their first breath of a new chapter in their fight for survival. The mercenaries were only the beginning. They were up against far more than they had realized, but together they would face whatever came their way. The moon's surface was cold and barren, the perfect hiding place for the three of them, at least for the time being. As the ship's engines powered down, the hum of activity inside the cockpit faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Ethan's breath fogged slightly in the cool air as he sat back in his seat, his mind spinning with everything that had happened in the past few days. The mercenaries, the chase, and the strange connection between him and the two alien women had left him with more questions than answers. But now, in the stillness of the moment, There was a sense of urgency in the air. Lyra and Zara had made it clear that their enemies weren't the only ones after them. There was more to their story. Much more. And Ethan was about to learn the truth. Lyra was the first to break the silence. She had been sitting in the pilot's seat, her gaze fixed on the view outside as though lost in thought. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady but filled with something more, something unspoken. "There's something we need to tell you, something that explains why we're here." Ethan turned in his seat to face her, his heart rate picking up. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cautious but curious. He had known that there was more to their story, but he hadn't expected it to come out so suddenly. Zara, sitting next to him, gave him a soft look, her golden eyes filled with a mix of sadness and strength. "It's time for you to know, Ethan," she said. "Time for you to understand why we came to you." Lyra nodded, her expression hardening as she faced Ethan. "We weren't always like this," she said, her words heavy with the weight of history. "We weren't always hunted. We were once part of a mighty empire. An empire that stretched across the stars, with power that no one dared challenge. But that all ciao." The days after Lyra and Zara revealed the truth about their past were a blur of emotions for Ethan. He had been thrust into a world far beyond his understanding, a world filled with powerful enemies, ancient prophecies, and dangerous decisions. But as the three of them settled into their new reality, a sense of determination began to form. They were in this together, Ethan, Lyra, and Zara, and no matter what lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The bond between them grew stronger, with each passing day. Ethan had always been a solitary person, someone who kept his distance from others. But Lyra and Zara had changed that. They weren't just companions. They were his family now. And family meant trust. It meant loyalty. It meant standing up for each other no matter the odds. Ethan could see the change in himself as well. He had always been uncertain, questioning his purpose, and wondering if there was more to life than the routine he had settled into. But now, with Lyra and Zara by his side, he had a purpose. He wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something greater than himself. As they moved through the galaxy, Ethan began to notice the way Lyra and Zara interacted with each other. They weren't just powerful beings. They were sisters in arms. Their bond was unspoken, but undeniable. It was a bond forged through hardship, through years of running and fighting for survival. But it was also a bond built on trust. They trusted each other completely, and that trust extended to Ethan. It wasn't long before Ethan found himself opening up to them in ways he had never done with anyone before. He began to share his own past, his own fears and hopes, and in return, Lyra and Zara shared more of their stories with him. They spoke of their lost empire, of the people they had once ruled, and of the betrayal that had shattered their lives. They spoke of their struggles to survive, their constant fear of being hunted, and the pain of losing everything they had known. In those quiet moments, as the three of them sat together in the ship's lounge, Ethan felt a sense of connection he had never experienced before. Lyra and Zara weren't just warriors. They were survivors just like him. They had lost everything, yet they had kept going. And now, they were fighting not just for themselves, but for a future where the galaxy could live in peace. But despite the bond they were forming, danger was always lurking. Their enemies were never far behind. The mercenaries who had pursued them on the spaceport were only a small part of a much larger web of threats. There were factions across the galaxy who would stop at nothing to capture Lyra and Zara, to use their powers for their own gain. And there were others who sought to destroy them entirely, to erase their existence from history. It wasn't long before they encountered a new threat, one that came from an unexpected direction. They had just arrived at a small, uncharted planet, hoping to lay low for a while when they received an urgent message. The message was from an old ally of Lyra and Zara's, a being who had helped them escape the Empire all those years ago. The message was brief, but it was clear. They were being watched, and their enemies were closing in. Ethan sat in the cockpit with Lyra, his heart pounding. They had barely set down on the planet's surface when the warning came through. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Lyra's expression was calm, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "We can't stay here long. They'll be coming for us and we need to move quickly, but first we need to meet with our contact. They have information we need." Zara appeared in the doorway, her eyes scanning the horizon outside. "We don't have much time," she said. "We'll make it quick, but we need to be ready for anything." The tension in the air was palpable. Ethan could feel it in his chest, a knot of anxiety that had become all too familiar. They weren't just running anymore, they were preparing for a fight. And this time, there was no turning back. As they left the ship and made their way through the dense forest on the planet's surface, Ethan couldn't help but think about how far they had come. When he had first met Lyra and Zara, he had no idea what he was getting into. But now he was fully committed. They had become his family, and he would do anything to protect them. The forest was quiet, the only sound the crunch of their footsteps on the soft earth beneath them. The air was thick with moisture, and the trees were tall and dense, casting deep shadows across the ground. It felt like they were walking through another world, one that was far removed from the danger and chaos that awaited them. After a few hours of walking, they arrived at a small, hidden clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a lone figure, cloaked in shadows. It was hard to make out any details at first, but as they drew closer, Ethan could see the outline of a tall, slender being, their features obscured by the hood of their cloak. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "You're late." The figure moved, stepping into the light. Ethan gasped as he saw the being's face. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its skin was a deep shade of blue, and its eyes glowed faintly, with a soft silver light. The being was tall, slender, and elegant, with an air of ancient wisdom about them. "I'm sorry," the being said, their voice smooth and melodic. "I had to make sure I wasn't followed. You know how dangerous things are." Ethan looked. Between Lyra and the stranger, his curiosity piqued. "Who are you?" The being turned to him, their eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel both uncomfortable and strangely honored. "I am Nyx," the being said. "A friend of Lyra and Zara's from a long time ago. I have information about your enemies, and more importantly, I know what you need to do next." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure whether to trust this being, but Lyra and Zara seemed to have faith in them. "What's the next step?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of urgency in the air. Nyx took a deep breath, their silver eyes focused on Ethan. "The prophecy is only part of the story," they said. "There is more at play here, more than you realize. The galaxy is on the brink of a great war, and your role in it will be pivotal, but you cannot do this alone." Ethan felt the weight of those words settle over him. He had always known that he was part of something bigger, but hearing it from someone else, someone who seemed to know far more than he did, made everything feel more real. His role in the galaxy's future was about to become clearer, but it also meant facing more danger than he had ever imagined. "You will need to gather allies," Nyx continued. "The forces that will oppose you are vast and powerful, but with the right allies, you can win." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes focused on Nyx. "We've been running for so long, Nyx. We've been hunted, forced to hide. But we're done hiding. We're ready to fight." Nyx nodded slowly, their expression grim. "Then we must prepare. There's no turning back now. The future of the galaxy is in your hands, Ethan. It's time to make your move." As the words sank in, Ethan felt a new sense of determination rise within him. The road ahead would be difficult. They had enemies, yes, but they also had each other. And together they would fight for a future where peace was possible, where the galaxy could finally find balance. The bond between him, Lyra, and Zara had been forged in the heat of battle, in the face of danger. And now, that bond would be their strength. They would face the coming storm together, and no matter what happened, they would stand united. The journey from one hidden world to another had become more than just a series of escapes. It had become a battle for survival, one that was no longer about fleeing but about fighting back. Ethan, Lyra, and Zara were no longer just running from their enemies. They were taking their first steps toward uniting those who would stand with them, towards fulfilling the prophecy that had bound them together. With Nyx's guidance, the three of them had gathered crucial information about the forces aligned against them. They knew the enemy's movements, their resources, and most importantly, the places where they could find allies willing to stand by their side. There was still much to learn, but Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future of the galaxy was no longer just a distant idea. It was a reality they were fighting for. Ethan sat quietly in the cockpit of their ship, staring out at the stars. The soft hum of the engines was a constant reminder that they were no longer just drifting from place to place. They had a mission now. The long stretches of space between destinations were no longer filled with idle time. They were filled with purpose. Ethan, Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts. We're almost there. Ethan turned to look at her. She was sitting in the pilot's seat, her face as calm and focused as always. Beside her, Zara was reading data on a tablet, her golden eyes scanning the information with quick precision. The two of them had become more than just allies. They were his family now, each of them bringing their own strengths to the table. Together, they had made it this far. Where are we headed? Ethan asked, his voice steady. We're going to meet with an old ally of mine, Lyra replied, her eyes narrowing as she navigated through a narrow asteroid belt. Someone who can help us build the support we need. They control a network of resistance fighters who oppose the factions hunting us. If we can convince them to join us, we'll have a real chance. Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of hope. He hadn't realized how much he had come to rely on Lyra and Zara, how much he had begun to trust them. He had always been a lone wolf, but now, with them by his side, he felt a part of something bigger. Something